The wind off the Hudson River in the winter of 1966 didn't just blow, it bit. It carried the kind of wet, penetrating cold that seeped through wool coats and settled deep in the marrow of your bones, a constant aching reminder that the city of New York could be a cruel and unforgiving place. In Hell's Kitchen, the wind howled down the narrow canyons of tenements, rattling the frosted windows of the Irish pubs and sending trash skittering across the frozen pavement like frightened rats. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of night where sensible men stayed indoors with a bottle of rye and a warm radiator, but for the men who operated in the shadows of the city's underworld, the weather was just another adversary to be ignored. On the corner of 10th Avenue, a nondescript brick building sat hunkered against the gale. There was no sign above the door, only a rusted metal grate and windows painted black from the inside. To the casual passerby, it looked like an abandoned warehouse, a relic of a time when the docks were teeming with legitimate cargo. But inside, the air was thick, hot, and heavy with the smell of violence. It was a private gym, a place that didn't appear in the yellow pages and certainly didn't cater to the executives looking to trim their waistlines before summer. This was a slaughterhouse disguised as a training facility, owned and operated by the Genovese crime family for a very specific purpose. Inside, the sound was rhythmic and terrifying. Thwack, thwack, thwack. In the center of the ring, a man was dismantling a heavy bag with a precision that bordered on mechanical. He was a mountain of a human being, standing 6'4", with shoulders that seemed to span the width of a Cadillac grille. His name was Commander Thomas Bulldog Brannigan, though in this room no one dared call him anything but Sir or Commander. He was stripped to the waist, his torso a roadmap of scars and muscle, sweat glistening on his skin despite the chill that leaked through the brick walls. He moved with a terrifying grace for a man of his size, his feet shuffling across the canvas in a blur, his fists pistoning out with force that shook the iron chains holding the bag to the ceiling. Brannigan wasn't a mobster. He wasn't a wise guy made in the back of a social club. He was something far more dangerous. He was a weapon that had been forged by the United States Navy, tempered in the fires of covert operations, and then discarded when his appetite for violence became too much even for the military to stomach. Disgraced, discharged, and angry, he had found a new home with the Italians, who saw in him not a liability, but an asset. They saw the future of warfare on the streets of New York. Watching him from the shadows of the ringside were two men. One was Sal the Saint Gigante, a capo in the Genovese family who wore a camel haircoat and a look of smug satisfaction. He chewed on a toothpick, his eyes gleaming as he watched Brannigan obliterate the leather bag. To Sal, Brannigan represented the ultimate edge. For years, the Italians had struggled to keep a lid on Harlem. They had the money, and they had the connections, but the men uptown, Bumpy Johnson's men, they had a ferocity that was hard to match. But this was science. This was military-grade destruction. The other man was the gym owner, a nervous little Irishman named Mickey, who kept wiping his palms on his trousers. He had seen fighters come and go, Golden Gloves champs, prize fighters, street brawlers, but he had never seen anything like the commander. The way Brannigan moved wasn't about sport. It wasn't about points. It was about termination. Every strike was designed to break a bone, rupture an organ, or stop a heart. It made Mickey sick to his stomach, but he knew better than to say a word. "Look at that animal," Sal whispered, the toothpick dancing in the corner of his mouth. "Just look at him, Mickey. That's $100,000 of government training right there, and now he belongs to us." "He's terrifying, Mr. Gigante," Mickey stammered. "He broke 3 ribs on that sparring partner this morning. The kid didn't even have time to put his hands up." "Good," Sal grunted. "The streets don't give you time to put your hands up. That's the point. We're going to take a dozen of our best soldiers, and Brannigan is going to turn them into a death squad. By the time he's done, we won't just run the numbers in Harlem. We'll own the air they breathe." Brannigan finished his set with a spinning back fist that nearly tore the heavy bag from its moorings. He stopped, his chest heaving rhythmically, his eyes scanning the empty gym with the predatory intensity of a shark in bloody water. He grabbed a towel and wiped his face, not looking at Sal or Mickey. He didn't respect them. To him, they were civilians with money, useful idiots. He was the warrior. "Is he coming?" Brannigan barked, his voice a gravelly rumble that echoed off the concrete walls. Sal checked his gold Rolex. "He'll be here." Bumpy Johnson doesn't turn down an invitation, especially when he thinks he's being respected. I told him we wanted to discuss a truce, maybe open up some new territory in the Bronx. He thinks this is a sit-down. Brannigan sneered, throwing the towel onto the canvas. "A sit-down, you mobsters and your tea parties. I told you, you want to take the city? You cut the head off the snake. You don't talk to it." "Bumpy isn't just a snake, Commander," Sal said, his voice losing some of its smugness. "He's a legend. He's survived more wars than you've read about. You don't just kill Bumpy Johnson. You have to neutralize him. You have to show him that he's obsolete. He's a thug in a suit." Brannigan spat. "And tonight, I'm going to show you exactly how fragile legends really are." 3 miles uptown, the atmosphere was different. In the back of a black Lincoln Continental moving slowly down Lenox Avenue, the air was warm and smelled faintly of expensive cigars and leather. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat in the rear seat, looking out at the kingdom he had built. The snow was falling harder now, dusting the awnings of the jazz clubs and the stoops of the brownstones in a layer of pristine white. Even in the bitter cold, Harlem was alive. Bumpy saw the young men on the corners, huddled in their coats, their eyes sharp and watchful. He saw the mothers hurrying home with grocery bags, heads bowed against the wind. He saw the life, the struggle, and the vibrancy that the rest of the world tried to ignore. But tonight, Bumpy's mind wasn't on the poetry of the street. It was on the intelligence report Junie Bird had brought him that morning. Junie sat in the front passenger seat, his massive frame filling the space. He was silent, as usual, his eyes scanning the street, checking mirrors, watching every car that pulled alongside them. Junie Bird was a man who communicated in actions, not words. If he spoke, it was important. If he was quiet, he was working. "You sure about this intel, Junie?" Bumpy asked softly, his voice barely rising above the hum of the engine and the soft jazz playing on the radio. Junie nodded, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Solid, Bumpy. My cousin works cleanup at that gym in Hell's Kitchen. Says the Italians brought in a specialist, some Navy guy. Says he's training a crew, not for boxing, for war." Bumpy took a slow drag from his cigar, the ember glowing bright in the dim interior of the car. He exhaled a plume of blue smoke that swirled against the glass. "A specialist," Bumpy mused. "That's unlike Genovese. They usually prefer to keep things in the family. Bringing in an outsider, a military man, that reeks of desperation or ambition. They say he's a monster," Junie added, his voice low. "Say he moves faster than anything they've ever seen. They call him Bulldog." "Bulldog," Bumpy repeated, a faint smile touching his lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of cold calculation. Dogs are dangerous, Junie, but dogs can be trained, and if they can't be trained, they can be put down. The car turned west, leaving the familiar comfort of Harlem behind. They crossed the invisible border at 110th Street, and the city changed. The lights seemed harsher, the streets grittier. They were entering hostile territory, the industrial wasteland of Hell's Kitchen, where the Irish gangs and the Italian mobsters held an uneasy truce. Bumpy knew that walking into that gym was a risk. Sal Gigante was a snake, a man who smiled with his mouth while his hand reached for a knife. But Bumpy also knew that knowledge was power. He couldn't fight a threat he didn't understand. He needed to see this bulldog for himself. He needed to look into the man's eyes and see if he was truly a soldier or just another bully with a badge. "We're going in light," Bumpy said as the car approached 10th Avenue. "Just you and me. I don't want a spectacle. I don't want them thinking we're afraid." "I got the piece," Junie said, patting the bulge under his jacket. "Keep it holstered unless I say otherwise," Bumpy ordered. "Tonight isn't about bullets. It's about psychology. If this man is as good as they say, a gun won't scare him. We need to see what makes him tick." The Lincoln pulled up to the curb in front of the blacked-out gym. The street was deserted, the wind howling through the alleyways like a mournful ghost. Bumpy buttoned his cashmere overcoat, adjusted his fedora so the brim sat just right, and stepped out into the freezing night. The cold hit him like a physical blow, but he didn't flinch. He stood tall, checking his cufflinks, composing himself. To the world, he was a gangster. To himself, he was a chess player, and he was about to step onto a new board. Junie was at his side instantly, a silent sentinel. They walked to the metal door. Junie banged on it 3 times, a heavy, authoritative sound that demanded entry. A slide opened. A pair of eyes peered out. "Yeah? Mr. Johnson is here to see Mr. Gigante," Junie rumbled. The slide slammed shut. The sound of heavy locks tumbling echoed from inside. The door groaned open, revealing the dimly lit interior of the gym. Bumpy stepped across the threshold, moving from the biting cold of the street into the humid, sweat-stained air of the gym. The smell hit him first. It was the primal scent of men at work, stale perspiration, old leather, the sharp tang of liniment, and the metallic odor of blood. It was a smell Bumpy knew well from his days in the penitentiary, the smell of confined men preparing for violence. The gym was a cavernous space, shadows clinging to the corners where the overhead industrial lights didn't reach. In the center, illuminated by a harsh cone of light, was the boxing ring, and standing in the ring, leaning against the ropes with his arms crossed, was Commander Brannigan. Sal Gigante stepped forward from the shadows, his arms spread wide in a gesture of false welcome. "Bumpy, my friend, you made it. Come in, come in. Get out of the cold." Bumpy didn't return the smile. He walked slowly toward the ring, his eyes not on Sal, but on the man in the ring. He took in every detail, the size of the man, the way he stood with his weight perfectly balanced, the arrogance etched into his jawline, the deadness in his eyes. Bumpy had seen killers before. He had broken bread with them, and he had buried them. But this man was different. There was a discipline to his menace, a structured cruelty that was foreign to the chaotic violence of the streets. "Sal," Bumpy said, his voice smooth and level. "You invite me all the way down here in a blizzard. I assume it's not to show me your jump rope skills." Sal laughed, a nervous, barking sound.
"Always the comedian."
invited you here because times are changing. You know that. The world is getting faster, harder. We need to evolve. I wanted to introduce you to our new consultant. Sal gestured to the ring. This is Commander Brannigan, formerly of the United States Navy SEALs. He's going to be helping us with some efficiency training. Brannigan didn't move. He just stared down at Bumpy from the elevated platform of the ring, looking at the older man in the expensive suit like a lion looking at a gazelle. Consultant, Bumpy repeated, testing the word. He walked up to the edge of the ring, looking up. That's a fancy word for a hired gun, isn't it? Brannigan finally spoke. I'm not a gun, old man. I'm the hand that holds it. The insult hung in the air, sharp and immediate. Junie Byard stiffened, his hand twitching toward his lapel, but Bumpy didn't blink. He kept his gaze locked on Brannigan. Is that right? Bumpy asked softly. And what does the Navy teach you about respect, Commander? Or did you skip that day in basic training? Brannigan laughed. It was a deep, resonant sound that vibrated in the floorboards. He uncrossed his huge arms and walked to the center of the ring, rolling his neck with a sickening crack. Respect? Brannigan sneered. Respect is for men who fight their own battles. I've read your file, Johnson. You're a relic. You sit in your clubs in Harlem, drinking your champagne, while you send boys to die for you. You play with switchblades and tire irons. You think you're soldiers? You're street rats. The room went dead silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Mickey, the gym owner, looked like he was about to faint. He backed away into the shadows, terrified of what was about to happen. Sal Gigante was grinning, watching Bumpy closely, waiting for the explosion. He wanted to see Bumpy lose his cool. He wanted to see the famous Bumpy Johnson throw a tantrum so Brannigan could break him in half. Bumpy took a slow breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his silver cigarette case. He opened it, selected a cigar, and lit it with a gold lighter. The flame flared, illuminating his face. There was no anger there, only a profound, terrifying calm. Street rats. Bumpy exhaled a cloud of smoke. That's an interesting choice of words. You know, Commander, rats are survivors. They live where others die. They adapt. They endure. They scurry, Brannigan corrected, stepping closer to the ropes. He looked down at Bumpy with pure contempt. I was trained to dismantle men with my bare hands. I was trained to kill in silence, in the dark, underwater. You gangsters, you can't fight. You just ambush. You shoot from car windows because you're too scared to stand toe-to-toe with a real man. Brannigan turned to Sal, gesturing dismissively at Bumpy. Why are we wasting time with this? I thought you were bringing me a challenge. This is just a grandfather in a suit. Junie Byard had heard enough. He took a step forward, his voice a low growl. You want a challenge, big man? Step out of that ring. I'll show you what a Harlem street rat can do. Brannigan looked at Junie and smirked. Sit down, boy, before I hurt you. Bumpy raised a hand, stopping Junie in his tracks. No, Junie, the commander is right. Sal blinked. Excuse me? Bumpy looked up at Brannigan. He's right. I am a grandfather. I do wear a suit, and it has been a long time since I had to fight with my hands. Bumpy took another drag of his cigar, then carefully placed it on the corner post of the ring. The smoke curled up into the harsh light. But, Bumpy continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming hard as granite. You seem to be under the impression that a suit makes a man soft. You seem to believe that because I don't wear a uniform, I don't know what war is. Bumpy began to unbutton his cashmere overcoat. He folded it neatly and handed it to Junie. Then he adjusted his suit jacket, buttoning it. He didn't take off his fedora. You want to dismantle a man? Bumpy asked, walking to the stairs of the ring. You want to show us what your government money bought? Sal Gigante's eyes went wide. Bumpy, what are you doing? Don't be an idiot. He'll kill you. Bumpy ignored him. He walked up the steps and ducked under the ropes. He stood in the ring, looking small compared to the hulking mass of Brannigan. The contrast was absurd. Bumpy looked like a businessman who had taken a wrong turn. Brannigan looked like a Greek god of war. I'm giving the commander a chance to prove his theory, Bumpy said, standing in the center of the ring. The canvas was soft under his expensive leather shoes. He says gangsters can't fight. He says we only ambush. Bumpy spread his hands. Here I am. No gun, no knife, no car window. Just me. Brannigan stared at him, genuinely confused. Then he started to laugh again. It was a cruel, incredulous laugh. You're joking, right? You want to spar? With me? Not spar, Bumpy said softly. I don't play games, Commander. You insulted me. You insulted my people. You called us rats. Bumpy took a small step forward. I want you to show me this ultimate weapon you're so proud of. Come on, Bulldog, bite. The laughter died in Brannigan's throat. His eyes narrowed. He realized this wasn't a joke. The old man was serious, and for the first time, Brannigan felt a flicker of annoyance. It was the annoyance of a professional being wasted on an amateur. All right, Brannigan grunted. He cracked his knuckles. Have it your way, old man. I'll try not to break your hip. But you asked for this. Sal Gigante stepped up to the apron of the ring. Commander, don't kill him. Just teach him a lesson. Make him humble. He won't be humble, Brannigan said, settling into a combat stance. His hands came up, loose and ready. His chin tucked. His weight shifted to the balls of his feet. It was a perfect, textbook military fighting stance. He'll be in the hospital. Bumpy didn't raise his fists. He didn't crouch. He stood perfectly upright, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He looked entirely unprepared. He looked like a man waiting for a bus. Ready when you are, soldier, Bumpy whispered. Brannigan shook his head, a look of pity crossing his face. Pathetic. He lunged. It was a blur of motion. Brannigan moved with explosive speed, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. He aimed a grappling reach for Bumpy's lapels, intending to toss the older man across the ring like a rag doll to humiliate him before breaking him. It was a move he had used 100 times on trainees. It relied on overwhelming force and the assumption that the opponent would try to block or retreat. But Bumpy Johnson didn't retreat, and Bumpy Johnson didn't block. As Brannigan's massive hands reached out, Bumpy didn't move backward. He moved into the space. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, and as he moved, his right hand, which had been hanging loosely by his side, snapped upward. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a chop. It was a flick. In the split second before the fight began, while he was unbuttoning his coat, Bumpy had brushed his hand against the resin box in the corner, the box of powdered rosin fighters used to grip the canvas. He had palmed a dense, compressed chunk of the white powder. Now, as Brannigan's face came into range, Bumpy crushed the rosin in his fist and threw the dust directly into the Navy SEAL's wide-open, arrogant eyes. Poof! A white cloud exploded in Brannigan's face. The reaction was instant and visceral. Brannigan roared, his hands flying to his eyes as the gritty, stinging powder coated his corneas. He was blind, instantly, totally blind. The military precision, the textbook stance, the years of training, all of it vanished in a second of searing pain. Ah, you dirty! Brannigan screamed, stumbling back, flailing blindly. Bumpy didn't wait. He didn't pause to gloat. The moment the powder hit, Bumpy went to work. He wasn't fighting like a boxer. He wasn't fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like a man who had survived solitary confinement and prison riots. He was fighting like a rat in a corner. As Brannigan stumbled, his weight shifted backward onto his heels, his legs straight and vulnerable. Bumpy dropped low. He didn't aim for the head or the body. He aimed for the structure. He drove the heel of his expensive Italian shoe directly into the front of Brannigan's kneecap. He put every ounce of his weight, every year of his frustration, every bit of his contempt for this man's arrogance into the kick. Crack. The sound was sickening. It was the sound of dry wood snapping under an axe. It was the sound of anatomy being forced to do something it was never designed to do. Brannigan's knee hyperextended, bowing backward at a grotesque angle. The scream that tore out of Brannigan's throat wasn't human. It was the high-pitched primal shriek of an animal caught in a steel trap. The giant crumpled. His leg, his foundation, was gone. He collapsed onto the canvas, clutching his shattered knee, rolling in agony, the rosin still blinding him, tears streaming down his face mixing with the white powder into a paste of pain. The gym was silent again, but this time it was the silence of shock. Sal Gigante's mouth was hanging open, his toothpick falling to the floor. Mickey had covered his eyes. Junie Bird was smiling. A cold, dark smile. Bumpy stood over the writhing mass of muscle. He wasn't even breathing hard. He reached up and adjusted his fedora, which hadn't moved an inch. Brannigan was gasping, trying to crawl away, but he couldn't push off his ruined leg. "My leg, oh God, you broke my leg." Bumpy stepped closer. He placed his foot gently on Brannigan's chest, pinning him to the mat. He leaned down, his face hovering just inches from the soldier's ear. "You called us rats," Bumpy whispered, his voice calm, conversational. "You said we can't fight because we don't follow your rules." Bumpy pressed down harder with his foot, squeezing the air out of Brannigan's lungs. "But you see, Commander," Bumpy continued, "that's your problem. You think a fight is a competition. You think it's about who is stronger, who is faster, who has the better stance." Bumpy reached down and grabbed Brannigan by the throat. He didn't squeeze to kill, just enough to let the man know that his life was now property of Ellsworth Johnson. "A fight isn't a competition, son," Bumpy hissed. "A fight is a problem, and I solve problems by any means necessary." He released the throat and stood up straight. He looked at his hand, dusted with the white rosin. He clapped his hands together, dusting them off, the sound echoing like gunshots in the quiet gym. He turned to look at Sal Gigante. The capo was pale, staring at the broken ultimate weapon on the floor. "Sal," Bumpy said, walking toward the ropes, "I think your consultant is going to need some sick leave. It's a shame. He had such good posture." Bumpy ducked through the ropes and walked down the steps. He took his coat from Junie, slipped it on, and buttoned it against the cold. He looked back at the ring one last time. Brannigan was still sobbing, curled in a fetal ball, a ruined man. "Junie," Bumpy said, "let's go. It smells like failure in here." The silence in the gym following Bumpy's exit was heavy, broken only by the wet, ragged gasps of Commander Brannigan. Sal Gigante stared at the heavy metal door for a long time after it clicked shut. The steam heat in the pipes hissed, a sharp, mocking sound in the quiet. Sal felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was a low-level associate running sandwiches for Lucky Luciano. Fear. It started in his stomach, a cold, hard knot, and radiated outward, making his fingertips numb. He had brought Bumpy Johnson here to end a legend. He had staged this entire evening, the bitter cold, the remote location, the terrifying display of Brannigan's power to break the spirit of Harlem's godfather. He had wanted Bumpy to see the future and tremble. Instead, the future was currently sobbing on the floor, and the past had just walked out the door, adjusting his fedora without a scratch on him. "Mr. Gigante?" Mickey, the gym owner, whispered from the shadows. His voice trembled. Should I call an ambulance?" Sal turned slowly. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. The humiliation was a physical weight on his shoulders. He could already hear the whispers. Bad news didn't just travel in the underworld, it teleported. By morning, every boss from Brooklyn to Chicago would know that an aging black gangster had walked into a Genovese stronghold, crippled their prize fighter, and walked out. Sal would be a laughingstock, and in the mafia, a man who could be laughed at was a man who could be killed. "No ambulance," Sal said, his voice a dry rasp. He walked over to the ring and looked down at Brannigan through the ropes. The contempt on his face was absolute. "He's a soldier, right? Let him crawl." Sal turned to his own men, two silent bodyguards who had watched the debacle with open mouths. "Get the car, and get the crew, the heavy crew." "What are we doing, boss?" one of the guards asked. Sal buttoned his camel haircoat, his hands shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and rage. "Johnson thinks this is over. He thinks he made his point. He thinks he can walk away." Sal's eyes narrowed into slits. "He embarrassed me. Tonight. In my house. You don't embarrass a capo and live to talk about it over breakfast." He looked at the door again. "Burn it down," Sal whispered, the madness rising in his voice. "I want Harlem to burn. I want Johnson dead before he crosses 110th Street. Call the hit squad in the Bronx. Tell them to intercept. Tell them no talk, no messages, just lead. Lots of lead." Outside, the wind had turned vicious. It screamed off the Hudson River, carrying ice pellets that stung like buckshot. The black Lincoln Continental sat idling at the curb, a beast of steel and chrome in the swirling white vortex of the storm. Inside the car, the silence was different. It was the silence of a bomb that had been diffused but was still ticking. Bumpy Johnson sat in the back seat, his leather gloves resting on his knees. He wasn't shaking, but he was feeling the aftermath. The adrenaline that had allowed him to move with the speed of a man half his age was fading, replaced by the deep, aching throb in his joints that came with 60 years of hard living. He took a long, slow breath, tasting the stale cigar smoke that lingered in the upholstery. Junie Bird sat in the driver's seat, his massive hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2. He checked the rearview mirror, then the side mirrors, his eyes darting back and forth with the paranoia that kept men like them alive. "That went well," Junie rumbled, his voice low. Bumpy let out a short, dry chuckle. "It went exactly as it had to, Junie. But don't mistake a battle for the war. You think Sal's gonna retaliate?" "I think Sal Gigante is a small man with a big ego," Bumpy said, looking out at the desolate street. "I just popped his balloon. He won't go home and sleep on that. He can't. If he lets me live through the night, he loses his seat at the table. He has to hit us, and he has to hit us now." Bumpy reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a fresh cigar. He didn't light it. He just rolled it between his fingers, feeling the texture of the leaf. "He'll try to catch us on the West Side Highway. It's the only logical route back uptown in this weather. The side streets are too clogged with snow." "So we take the side streets?" Junie suggested, putting the car in gear. "No," Bumpy said sharply. "If we take the side streets, we get stuck. we get boxed in. A sitting duck is a dead duck. We take the highway. But we don't go home. Junie frowned, glancing back. Not go home? Mamie is waiting. Mamie knows the life, Bumpy said, his voice softening at the mention of his wife. She knows that when it snows like this, sometimes the plow doesn't come. If we go to the apartment, we bring the war to her doorstep. I won't have that. Sal will send a team to the Lenox Terrace. We need to be nowhere near it. Then where? Bumpy looked at the glowing tip of the cigar lighter as he pressed it in. The flash in is too public. The social clubs are the first place they'll look. Bumpy watched the snow pile up on the windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle. Take us to the warehouse on 131st, the one with the paper supply front. That place is a freezer, Bumpy, Junie argued. Ain't no heat in there. Cold keeps you awake, Bumpy said, and right now, being awake is the only thing keeping us from being a memory. The Lincoln pulled away from the curb, its tires crunching on the packed ice. They moved slowly, a black shark navigating a white ocean. As they turned onto the ramp for the West Side Highway, the city felt abandoned. The skyscrapers of Midtown were just ghostly outlines in the blizzard, their lights blurred and distant. Bumpy closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the hum of the engine. He thought about Brannigan. The man was a physical specimen, a marvel of training. But he was hollow. He had fought for a flag, then for a paycheck. He had never fought for survival. That was the difference. That was always the difference. Tail, Junie said. One word. Flat. Calm. Bumpy's eyes snapped open. He didn't turn around. He knew better than to make sudden movements. How many? 2 cars, Junie said, his eyes fixed on the mirror. Headlights off. They just rolled onto the ramp behind us. A sedan and a heavy coupe. They're moving fast, Bumpy. Too fast for this ice. They're not worried about crashing, Bumpy said, sliding his hand inside his coat to check the small. .38 snub-nose he had tucked into his waistband, the one concession to violence he had allowed himself after leaving the gym. They're worried about losing us. I can't outrun 'em on this ice, Junie said, the tension tightening his jaw. If I punch it, we spin out. Don't punch it, Bumpy ordered. Let them close the gap. Let them get confident. The pursuing cars were gaining rapidly. Through the rear window, obscured by the swirling snow, Bumpy could see the dark shapes growing larger. They were hunting in a pack. The lead car moved to the left lane to pull alongside, while the second car stayed tight on the Lincoln's bumper. It was a classic box maneuver. They wanted to force Junie into the guardrail. Hold steady, Bumpy whispered. Wait for it. The lead car, a gray Chevy Impala, pulled level with them. Bumpy could see the window rolling down. He could see the barrel of a Tommy gun poking out into the snowy night. The muzzle flash would be blinding in this darkness. Now, Junie. Brake, Bumpy shouted. Junie didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the brake pedal, not locking them, but pumping them with the skill of a man who had driven bootleg liquor through the Appalachians. The Lincoln's heavy frame shuddered, the speed dropping instantly. The move was unexpected. The hitman in the Chevy had anticipated a chase, an acceleration. When the Lincoln suddenly slowed, the Chevy shot past them, the gunner firing a burst that tore harmlessly into the night air ahead of the Lincoln's hood. The second car behind them wasn't so lucky. It couldn't react in time. It slammed into the back of the Lincoln with a sickening crunch of metal. The Lincoln lurched forward from the impact, but its weight saved it. The smaller pursuit car crumpled, its radiator exploding in a cloud of steam. It spun wildly out of control, careening across the ice and slamming into the concrete divider, blocking the Chevy that had tried to circle back. "Go," Bumpy yelled. Junie floored it. The Lincoln roared, fishtailing slightly as the tires fought for purchase, then gripped. They shot past the tangled wreck of the hit squad, leaving them in a chaotic pile of steam and twisted metal. "Amateurs," Junie spat, wrestling the wheel. "Sloppy." "Desperate," Bumpy corrected. "Sal is throwing everything he has at the wall. That makes him dangerous." The victory was short-lived. As they sped around the next curve near 96th Street, the road ahead was blocked. A delivery truck was parked sideways across the highway, lights off. It was a trap, blockade. Junie shouted, slamming the brakes again. The Lincoln slid, careening into the concrete divider with a bone-jarring impact. Metal screamed against stone. The car came to a rest, steam hissing from the radiator. "Bumpy, you okay?" Junie yelled, pulling his gun. "I'm fine," Bumpy groaned, checking his limbs. "Move, they're coming." They scrambled out of the car just as the pursuers from behind pulled up, blocking the retreat. 3 men jumped out of the Chevy, Tommy guns in hand. They were silhouettes against the headlights, faceless executioners. "Get down." Junie roared, diving behind the engine block of the crippled Lincoln. He opened fire. Bang, bang. One of the hitmen dropped, clutching his leg. The others scattered, taking cover behind their own car. Bullets sparked off the Lincoln's hood, whining into the night. Bumpy was crouched behind the rear wheel, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't have a big gun. He had insisted on going light to the gym. It was a mistake, a rare miscalculation born of arrogance. He had thought he could outsmart them. Now he was pinned down on a frozen highway ramp, with only Junie and a few rounds of ammunition between him and death. "I got 6 shots left, Bumpy." Junie yelled over the gunfire. "We can't hold them off forever." Bumpy looked around. They were trapped. To the right was the river, a dark abyss. To the left, the concrete wall. Ahead, the hitman. "We need a distraction," Bumpy said, his mind racing. He looked at the fuel cap of the Lincoln. It had been sheared off in the crash. Gasoline was dripping onto the snow. "Junie," Bumpy called out. "Do you have your lighter?" "What?" "Your lighter. Throw it to me." Junie didn't ask questions. He slid his Zippo across the ice under the car. Bumpy grabbed it. His hands were cold, shaking slightly, but his mind was clear. "Cover me," Bumpy yelled. Junie popped up and fired 2 shots, forcing the hitmen to duck. Bumpy ripped off his silk scarf. He shoved it into the fuel neck of the Lincoln, letting it soak up the leaking gas. He pulled it out, doused in fuel. "Get ready to run," Bumpy whispered. He flicked the lighter. The flame caught the fumes instantly. The scarf ignited with a whoosh. Bumpy threw the flaming scarf onto the pool of gasoline leaking under the car. "Run." Bumpy and Junie scrambled away from the Lincoln, diving over the concrete barrier and sliding down the snowy embankment toward the river just as the fire reached the tank. Boom! The explosion was massive. A fireball erupted into the night sky, turning the falling snow into orange rain. The force of the blast knocked the hitmen off their feet. The burning chassis of the Lincoln was lifted into the air, slamming back down in a twisted heap of metal. Bumpy and Junie tumbled down the hill, landing in the deep snow near the train tracks that ran along the river. They were bruised, cold, and covered in soot, but they were alive. "You crazy old man," Junie wheezed, staring up at the burning wreck on the ramp above. "You blew up the Lincoln." "It was insured," Bumpy said, dusting snow off his coat. "Come on, we have to keep moving. The explosion will bring the cops, but Sal will send a second wave." They moved through the shadows of the rail yards, heading north toward Harlem. It was a brutal march. The wind coming off the river was merciless. Bumpy's expensive shoes were soaked, his feet numb. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The warehouse on 131st Street was a relic of the industrial age, a cavernous brick tomb filled with pallets of newsprint and the smell of dry rot. It was freezing inside, colder even than the street, as the dampness of the river seeped through the walls. Junie unlocked the side door, and they slipped inside, the darkness swallowing them. Bumpy walked to a small office in the corner, a glass-walled box that overlooked the warehouse floor. He flipped a switch, and a single, naked bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows against the peeling paint. "Check the perimeter," Bumpy ordered. "Then find a phone." "I need to make a call." "I got a secure line in the back," Junie said. "Who we calling? The crew?" "No," Bumpy said, sitting down in a dusty wooden chair. He looked old in the yellow light, the lines on his face etched deep. "We call the crew, we start a war on the streets. Bodies drop. Police get involved. The feds come sniffing. That's what Sal wants. He wants chaos so he can hide his incompetence." Bumpy placed his fedora on the desk. "I need to call Mamie." Junie paused. "Bumpy, you tell her what's going on. She's going to worry." "She's already worrying, Junie. Silence is worse than bad news." Junie nodded and disappeared into the shadows of the warehouse. Bumpy sat alone. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He thought about the rosin powder in the gym. It had been a dirty trick, a street trick. Brannigan had called it cowardice. Bumpy called it survival. In Harlem, there were no points for second place. He picked up the heavy black rotary phone when Junie plugged it in. He dialed the number by heart. It rang twice. "Hello?" Her voice was tight, alert. She hadn't been sleeping. "Mamie," Bumpy said softly. "Ellsworth," she breathed, the relief evident in that single word. "Where are you?" "The radio said there was an accident on the West Side Highway. A shooting. I'm safe, honey." "I'm with Junie. We had a little disagreement with some friends from downtown." "Sal Gigante," Mamie said. It wasn't a question. She knew the players. She knew the game. "He's feeling emotional tonight," Bumpy said. "Listen to me, Mamie. I need you to do something. I need you to take the bag, the one in the back of the closet, the blue one, and I need you to go to your sister's in Queens right now. Don't pack anything else. Just the bag." "I'm not leaving you, Ellsworth," Mamie's voice hardened. "I am not running to Queens while you're out there in the cold. This isn't running, Mamie. It's strategy. If you're home, I have to worry about you. If I have to worry about you, I can't think clearly. And if I can't think clearly, Sal wins." There was a silence on the line. Bumpy could hear her breathing. He could picture her standing in their kitchen, wearing her silk robe, her eyes fierce and wet. She was the toughest person he knew, tougher than Brannigan, tougher than Junie. "The blue bag," she said finally. "Okay, but Ellsworth, yes, baby, you finish it, tonight. I don't want to look over my shoulder tomorrow. I promise," Bumpy said. "Go, I love you." He hung up the phone. The connection was broken, but the resolve was forged. Bumpy stood up. The fatigue was gone. In its place was a cold, crystalline clarity. Junie walked back into the office. "She safe?" "She's moving," Bumpy said. "Now we move." Junie walked over to a metal storage locker against the wall and spun the combination dial. The door creaked open, revealing the tools of their trade: 2 Thompson submachine guns, a sawed-off shotgun, and boxes of ammunition. "We loaded for bear," Junie said, tossing a Thompson to Bumpy. "What's the plan? We hitting the social club on Mulberry?" "No," Bumpy said, checking the action on the weapon, the metallic clack-clack echoing in the small room. We hit the club. We're fighting on their turf. They have 50 men there. We'd never make it to the door. Bumpy looked at Junie. We're going to Jersey. Junie's eyes went wide. Jersey? Sal's house? Bumpy, that's suicide. The commission, you can't hit a boss in his home. It's against the rules. Rules, Bumpy scoffed. Brannigan talked about rules. Sal talked about rules. But tonight, Sal tried to kill me on a public highway. He endangered civilians. He broke the pact. Bumpy walked to the window and looked down at the dark warehouse floor. When a man breaks the rules, he loses the protection of the rules. The commission won't save him. They'll look the other way. Because nobody likes a sloppy boss. Nobody likes a liability. Fort Lee is a fortress, Junie warned. High walls, gates, guards. It's a fortress designed to keep out police and burglars, Bumpy said, turning back to the light. It's not designed to keep out men who have nothing to lose. Sal thinks he's safe there. He thinks the war is happening in Harlem. He's sitting by his fire, waiting for the phone to ring with the news of my death. Bumpy grabbed a box of shells. Is the delivery van running? The Ford? Junie nodded. Yeah, it's gassed up. Good, Bumpy said. I want to be the one to deliver the news personally. The drive to New Jersey was a blur of white lines and darkness. They took the George Washington Bridge in the battered Ford delivery van, slipping out of the city like ghosts. The storm was breaking, the heavy snow turning to a light, freezing mist. Sal Gigante's estate was a sprawling neo-colonial mansion set back from the cliffs of the Palisades. It was a monument to excess, built on the backs of numbers runners, loan sharks, and union corruption. The iron gates were closed, topped with spikes. A guard booth sat at the entrance, a warm yellow light glowing inside. Junie stopped the van 100 yards down the road, killing the lights. One guard in the booth, Junie observed, probably 2 more roving the grounds. We don't go through the gate, Bumpy said. Too loud. We go over the wall on the south side. There's a tree line. They moved through the snow, the cold biting at their faces. Bumpy moved with a grim determination. He wasn't a Navy SEAL. He wasn't a ninja. He was a 60-year-old man in a ruined suit, but he moved with the silence of a shadow. They reached the brick wall. Junie laced his fingers together, creating a step. Bumpy stepped up, Junie hoisted him, and Bumpy rolled over the top, dropping into the snow on the other side. Junie followed, pulling himself up with brute strength. They were in. The grounds were quiet. The house loomed ahead, dark except for a few lights on the ground floor. Bumpy pointed to the French doors on the patio. They moved across the lawn, using the ornamental hedges for cover. They reached the patio. Bumpy peered through the glass. Inside, in a lavish study lined with mahogany bookshelves, sat Sal Gigante. He was wearing a silk robe, holding a snifter of brandy. He was pacing, talking on the telephone. He looked agitated. He was shouting into the receiver, gesturing with his free hand. Bumpy nodded to Junie. Junie raised the shotgun. He didn't aim for the man. He aimed for the lock on the French doors. Boom. The glass shattered. The wood splintered. The sound was deafening in the quiet suburb. Sal dropped the phone and spun around, his face a mask of terror. He reached for a drawer in his desk, undoubtedly for a gun, but he was too slow. Bumpy stepped through the broken doors, the Thompson resting easily at his hip. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. The presence of the weapon was enough. Don't, Bumpy said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. Sal froze, his hand hovering inches from the drawer. He looked at Bumpy, then at the shattered door, then at Junie, who was stepping in behind Bumpy, looking like a demon from the pit. "Johnson," Sal whispered, You can't be here." "I seem to be hearing that a lot tonight," Bumpy said, kicking the glass aside as he walked into the room. The warmth of the fire hit him, a stark contrast to the freezing night. "First your soldier tells me I can't fight. Now you tell me I can't be here." Bumpy walked to the desk. He reached out and gently closed the drawer Sal had been reaching for. "You have a very nice home, Sal," Bumpy said, looking around. "Very distinct. Is that an original Rembrandt? What do you want?" Sal stammered. "Money? Territory? I can give you the construction contracts in the Bronx. I can give you the docks." Bumpy laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. "You still don't get it. You think everything is for sale. You think because you bought a Navy SEAL, you bought victory. You think because you have a big house, you have safety." Bumpy walked around the desk until he was standing right next to Sal. The mobster smelled of fear and expensive cologne. "I don't want your money, Sal. I have my own. I don't want your territory. I have Harlem. And Harlem is enough. Then what?" Sal cried, tears forming in his eyes. "Why are you here?" "I'm here to teach you the lesson your commander missed," Bumpy whispered. He grabbed Sal by the collar of his silk robe and shoved him backward into his leather armchair. Sal collapsed, trembling. "You tried to kill me tonight," Bumpy said, leaning over him. "That was a mistake. But the bigger mistake was thinking that you could dictate terms to me. You thought I was old. You thought I was soft." Bumpy reached out and wiped his gloved hand on the lapel of Sal's silk robe. It left a faint white smear of rosin dust. "Dust," Bumpy said, pointing to the mark. "That's what your ultimate weapon was, just dust in the wind." "I'm sorry," Sal blubbered. "I swear, Bumpy." "It was the heat of the moment. I'll make it right." "You will," Bumpy agreed, "but not with money." Bumpy walked to the phone that was dangling off the hook. He picked it up and listened. The line was dead. He placed it back on the cradle. "Tomorrow morning," Bumpy said, staring into Sal's soul, "you are going to call the commission. You are going to tell them that you are stepping down. You are going to tell them that your heart isn't in it anymore. That the stress is too much. They won't accept that," Sal whispered. "They will," Bumpy said, "because if they don't, I will send copies of the photos I have. Photos of you meeting with the feds last month." Sal's eyes bulged. I know you didn't," Bumpy smiled, "but I have a very talented forger who says you did. And in this life, the accusation is as good as a conviction. It was a bluff. A magnificent, terrifying bluff. Bumpy didn't have any photos, but he knew Sal. He knew Sal was paranoid. He knew Sal was weak, and he knew that Sal would believe him. Sal slumped in the chair, defeated. The fight drained out of him. He looked small, shriveled. "Where do I go?" Sal asked weakly. "Florida is nice," Bumpy said. "The weather is better for your joints, and there are no icy roads." Bumpy turned to leave. He stopped at the shattered doors and looked back. "One more thing, Sal." "Yeah?" "Tell your friends," Bumpy said, his silhouette framed by the snowy night. "Tell them what happened tonight. Tell them that the old man in the suit didn't just beat your soldier. Tell them he walked into your house, took your dignity, and gave you your life back as a gift." Bumpy tipped his fedora. "Don't waste it." He stepped out into the cold. Junie followed, casting one last menacing look at the broken capo. As they walked back to the van, the snow finally stopped. The clouds broke, revealing a sliver of moon. The air was crisp, clean. "You think he'll do it?" Junie asked as they climbed back into the Ford. "You think he'll retire?" "He has no choice," Bumpy said, leaning his head back against the seat. "I took his power. A boss without power is just a man in a robe. He'll go to Florida. He'll play golf. And every time he swings a club, he'll think of me. Junie started the engine. Where to now, boss? Bumpy smiled. A real smile this time. Queens, Junie, I need to pick up my wife. The van pulled away, leaving the mansion behind. Bumpy Johnson had gone to war in the winter of 1966. He had been mocked, hunted, and cornered. But as the sun began to rise over the city, casting long shadows across the George Washington Bridge, the king of Harlem was still on his throne. He had proven that in the underworld, muscle might win a fight, but intelligence wins the war. And as for the ultimate weapon, the last anyone heard of Commander Brannigan, he was working security at a dive bar in Jersey City, walking with a permanent limp, telling anyone who would listen about the time he slipped on the ice. But the streets knew. The streets always knew, and they whispered the name Bumpy Johnson with a little more fear and a lot more respect.
Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.